what struck me is, and this beggars belief, it was that on each and every occasion when the murderer of the little girls in Southport was referred to Prevent, he was referred and his details were entered onto the Prevent database with a different spelling.
It was a coincidence that an NHS report into the Nottingham killer and a government review into the Southport killer were released on the same day. But that coincidence allows us to see similar failures in both attacks. In Nottingham, the NHS failed to properly monitor and control a violent man who should have been on medication. And in Southport, the Prevent anti-terror programme failed to keep track on a violent teenager obsessed with knives and massacres. 3 died in Nottingham and 3 in Southport. We can now talk to Patrick Hurley, who's the Labour MP for Southport, and joins us on the programme. Good morning.
Good morning.
I mean, we've linked these two huge failures, and we'll be talking about this throughout the programme today. But given that you are the MP for Southport, focusing on that report, for you, what is the main failing? What concerns you most with what we've heard?
There were a range of failings identified in the review that was published yesterday. The main thing for me, the terms of reference of the review were limited to the Prevent programme and the failings there. So more generally, it appears that there were failings in terms of joint agency working and working across government silos, so that maybe Prevent didn't speak to the local authority child adolescent mental health services, that there were reports to the police weren't followed up and reported through to national authorities. But specifically within Prevent, what struck me is, and this beggars belief, it was that on each and every occasion when the murderer of the little girls in Southport was referred to Prevent, he was referred and his details were entered onto the Prevent database with a different spelling, and it appears that there's a possibility that this might be one of the reasons, or certainly in other cases, this could lead to searches not being fulfilled. That kind of data problem might mean that there's a lack of follow-up and a lack of joined up thinking within Prevent, never mind between different agencies.
So even before we get onto the broader problems with Prevent, which some say is the organisation is not designed to capture people like Axel Rudakubana, who maybe don't, stick to one ideology, the very fact that if his name was spelled incorrectly, he was not coming up in multiple searches, therefore maybe not enough weight was given to him as a threat. It's beyond belief, really, Patrick. I mean, the question for most people now is, how do we prevent this from happening again? Do you have a sort of suggestion for the government as to what they could do to ensure that no other families have to go through what your constituents have?
So the review into Prevent failings, it was very clear that the processes and procedures had been followed pretty much accurately and pretty much in accordance with how they should have been. But it was the judgment on whether or not Rudakubana should have been followed up and should have been allocated a caseworker in the Prevent programme, and it was that judgment that was found to be wanting. So my main takeaway from having read the report yesterday morning was that if we do want to stop something like this from happening again, and we want to learn the lessons and make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen again elsewhere in the country, we need to implement some of the recommendations of the review. And some of the recommendations of that review are around improving training and guidance to Prevent officers, and making sure that when people who do seem to almost not have an ideology and are just interested in generic extremism or generic violence, that they are also placed into the Prevent programme. There exists a way for that to have already happened back in 2019, and for some reason that this wasn't applied to Rudakubana when it should have been. And if that had been the case, then we might not be sitting here this morning talking about this, but he may have been stopped 5-6 years ago.
And we're going to be talking to one of the authors of Prevent after 8 o'clock today to find out how exactly that programme can be updated, changed and what needs to happen. Finally, Patrick, I want to ask you about social media. Some of the things that Rudakubana was looking at were available widely on the internet. Social media companies have been asked to take them down. Have they been removed yet?
Not to my knowledge, no. There was a request that I made, and I know the Home Secretary was very clear a couple of weeks ago that this material, these videos, should be taken down. There has been no movement on that as far as I can see. And it's not just the prevalence and the mainstreaming of this sort of material. It's also the algorithms which these social media companies are putting in front of our children and teenagers' faces and on their phones, that you can watch one video and then be served up a more extreme version of something just because the way these systems are set up. And I do think that's something that government needs to look and see what can be done to regulate more effectively, to stop that sort of thing where people can go down a rabbit hole of extremism, and within months, people who are would normally be good members of society have delved into this almost self-radicalisation perspective, and that's something that I really do think we need to get to grips with.
Yeah, such a good point. Patrick Hurley, Labour MP for Southport, thank you for joining us on the programme.
It's almost as if social media companies don't care at all. And the question we'll be asking at 8 o'clock, I suppose, is do you want two different organisations, one that deals with ideological violent people and one which deals with non-ideological, or does Prevent get somehow expanded to include everyone who's a bit violent? And can it possibly manage to do that? There's got to be something, because quite clearly it's too easy to fall between the cracks in this country if you present very clearly with dangerous violence. Too little is done to stop you actually taking it to the next step. We'll be getting into that over the course of the programme.
The harm that Rudakubana has caused to each family, each child, and to the community has been profound and permanent. For the families of Elsie, Bibi and Alice, they will never recover from what happened to their daughter. For those children and the adults that he attempted to murder, their lives will never be the same. His culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest. I do not, however, take into account against him what happened in different parts of the country after his arrest. He did not cause that. I'm now going to sentence Axel Rudakubana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already. He's been in custody for 175 days on remand, which will be credited. Therefore, the minimum term is 51 years and 190 days. On counts 4 to 11, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life with a minimum term of 18 years, less 175 days served, on each count concurrently with each other. Allowing for his time served on remand, the minimum term on those counts is 17 years and 190 days. On counts 12 and 13, I sentence him concurrently to custody for life with a minimum term of 16 years, less his time served on remand, on each count concurrently with each other, leading to a minimum term on those counts of 15 years and 190 days. On counts 14 and 16, I sentence him to 18 months custody concurrently with each other and all other offences. He will pay the appropriate amount under he will pay the appropriate amount under 18 statutory charge, which will be entered on the court record. Accordingly, in total, I sentence Rudakubana to 13 sentences of custody for life and a minimum term to be served in custody of 51 days and 190 days. It is highly likely that he will never be released.